Hello, my name is Marta Medina. I'm doing a video in regards to a book I bought at the beginning of the semester for my political science class. The book is by James Duane called You Have the Right to Remain Innocent. It does look like this. Mine's a little bit messed up. I carry it everywhere. I did read it twice. I tend to read a book really quick and then I feel like I have to go back and reread it to get everything that's very important and valuable into detail. I did take some notes because there's a lot of information and a lot of really uh, good stories that I feel are sad. But I do think it was an important lesson for me to read this book just because it could potentially help me, my future family, future kids, friends, anybody that isn't completely aware of their amendments and their constitutional rights. The stories are of a lot of innocent people that were exonerated after decades of being wrongfully imprisoned due to if they didn't insist on avoiding their fundamental rights of self-incrimination. They did have to pay high prices, and as members of the society, due to us failing to assert our constitutional rights, we do have consequences for that. According to the book, one of the first things I read was in regards to if a police officer was to stop you and question you, they should only ask you two questions that you are responsible for answering. James Duane did say memorize these questions. They are very important. If the police officers ask you anything else besides these two questions, he does advise to assist in practicing your Fifth Amendment right. Asking for a lawyer, asking for a family member, just not saying anything at all. The two questions are inside the book, page 7. Who are you is the first question, and the second question is what are you doing right here, right now? Any other question, you should practice to not say anything at all. Anything can incriminate you in the court system. Police are only human. They can't know everything. It is something that is part of the system, and according to the book, it's broken just due to the fact that your whole life can potentially be heavily judged on a judge and a set of juries, and they're just doing what they're trained to do. The main point of this book is to let us know about our Fifth Amendment right. It just is as valuable to anybody if they're innocent, just as much as if somebody is guilty. Many people have no idea how many ways we convict ourselves of a crime. There are many crimes that we don't even know about. According to the book on page 16, there are over 10,000 criminal regulations that many of us don't even know exist. And it's impossible, really, for us to know that they exist. I feel like you have to be in the political or the justice system for like over 20 years to probably know every single criminal offense and regulation and law. There was an example in the book on page 17 of a young sailor that thought they were doing good by freeing a 500-pound sea turtle that was entangled, just to find out that it was a criminal offense It was a violation of the Endangered Species Act to handle any endangered species. So things that we believe that we're doing good because we feel like it's the right thing to do, or we didn't mean any harm, could essentially be something that is a criminal offense to the court system, and that could harm us in reality. Good intentions and ignorance of law are no defense at all, according to James Duane. Police lie all the time. There was a story on page 29 of the book, actually two stories. The disappearance of a 3-year-old girl, the father was the primary suspect. They had already found the dead body. The police didn't tell the parents, and they took them in for questioning, even though they already knew that she was dead and they had found the body. So police are going to lie to get anything, any kind of information or anything to incriminate you. They will lie no matter what. Also in 2008, there was a 16-year-old girl that was being integrated by the police due to the death of her infant son. She was only 16 years old. She denied guilt that she committed the crime. There was no evidence at all that she did anything to commit this crime. It was due to natural causes, but the police kept aggressively questioning her for hours. They were trying to intentionally have her misrepresent any kind of information she was giving them, to prove that she probably did do it. The police said they wanted to help her, but instead they did break her down, questioned her until she completely broke down into tears and admitted that she did something that she didn't even do. She was in jail for 3 years until the charges were dropped based off no evidence. There was no evidence. The baby's death was due to natural causes. And police always say that they want to help us, or a lot of things that I've read in the book that police officers were telling people are, they want to help. They're going to give you the minimum punishment. They say, oh, this is off record, but nothing is off record when you speak to them. They try to grant you immunity. They always say your whole life is ahead of you. Make things right. This is not the end of your life. I don't think you're a murderer. Anything that they can get you to say that can potentially incriminate you, and use your words against you in the court of law, they will do. That's what they're trained to do, essentially. As I continued reading through the book, I found a lot of stories that many people were potentially incriminated for crimes that they did not commit. On page 35, there was a 17-year-old boy called Salvador Rubio. He was integrated by the police in a murder case. He faced 45 years prison term, first-degree murder, and was sentenced to 60 years. He was tricked into making statements by the police telling him all these things, like make it right, like you have your whole life ahead of you. The officer gave him false and worthless legal advice, like if you helped your friend or you're uncooperative, it's going to be worse for you. You can possibly, him thinking he can possibly escape any kind of criminal liability if you just helped or said what they wanted, you know, him to say, he would be, you know, not guilty and not reliable. And then come to find out he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Now, although in the book James did say that he didn't know whether he was guilty or innocent, because they never knew about this case. Just the simple fact that he's a 17-year-old that got 60 years in prison is a little bit excessively wrong of the society, our society, to do something like that, in my opinion. And then also, like in page 42 of the book, Robert Purdue agreed to give a statement to an FBI agent regarding a bank robbery that was committed. He was just the lookout guy. He wasn't involved physically inside the robbery. Come to find out that the FBI agent did go to court, and he gave a he testified against the defendant on everything that he told him. He didn't say everything that Robert had told him. He left out a lot of important information regarding his role in the robbery. And they ended up trying to convict him as well due to a clerk being shot. And Robert was just outside the whole time. He didn't shoot anybody. He wasn't physically robbing inside the premises. He was just the lookout person, getaway. He was convicted to 122 years in prison. So if you're suspected for anything, if you talk to the police, it just equals no win at all. It did come to my attention in the book, there was a lot of statistics that were a little baffling to me. 125 proven false confessions. 33% suspects were juveniles. 43% of them were either disabled or ill. And on page 44 of the book, there was a 16-year-old boy named Felix. He was questioned in the middle of the night without a lawyer. They didn't even he asked for his mother as well, and they denied him. In regards to the police trying to get a detailed video confession of a murder. Later on, he come to find out he had an airtight alibi, and all his charges ended up being dismissed, and he was released from jail. So most of the cases I did notice were all very young juveniles, possibly scared. We don't really know what to say. We want to help. It's only, everybody always knows that, if a cop asks you something, like, you have to answer them. Like, if you're not guilty, you have to cooperate and give any kind of information they need, because that's the right thing to do. That's how I feel the system has it set up for us, which makes a lot of sense now by reading this book. Also, on page 45 of the book, there was a man named Leonard Fraser. He was 51 years old. He was charged for murdering a woman named Natasha Ryan. She was a 14-year-old girl that was missing for 5 years. Come to find out, he got very lucky that he gave a recorded confession, which sometimes you think, like, if you didn't do it, like, why would you confess? But I feel like there's only so much that people can take for a prolonged period of time until they break down and just want to be done with it. They think you can just fix it afterwards because you didn't do anything. But a lot of people are not as lucky as Leonard was. He did get a break. Come to find out, the woman was alive and living at her boyfriend's house. So he was going to get convicted for a murder he didn't even commit. And the girl was alive. It wasn't even dead. So that's even the more crazy part about it. As well as Eddie Lorving. Hopefully I said that correctly. On page 45 and 46 of the book, he was a soldier in the military that was being charged for murder and rape. He insisted that he was innocent. The police kept asking him, questions nonstop for a whole day long, until he was just worn out and just gave a detailed confession of the crime. He served 20 plus years in prison until there was evidence found that he was actually innocent. When he was released, they asked him, why would you give them a confession? And he later on explained that he was broken down for over 7 hours. He thought that if he would just tell the police what they wanted to hear, that he would just hire a lawyer and the lawyer would make everything go away. But that mistake cost him 20 plus years of his life. And it's sad to hear because there's other stories in the book where a lot of people were, convicted of these crimes, and one of them was released, like a significant amount of years later in his life, and then he's released and then he found out he had cancer. And it's like, those stories, like, that's really sad. Nobody wants to hear that. Or if that was like a significant family member or someone in your life, to have to experience that, I think is very harsh, and as well as of an analysis in the book is 44% of confession cases reveal that they were interrogated by police for 6 to 12 hours. So this is why a lot of these situations end up happening, in my opinion. As well as the case of Ronald Cotton. He volunteered to go to the police station to clear up him being a suspect in a rape investigation. Come to find out, he voluntarily went to the police station and he ended up being arrested and imprisoned for 10 years for a pair of rapes he didn't even commit. All because he accidentally mixed up the dates of his alibi witness. He was innocent. He voluntarily went because he knew he was innocent. He gave the police officers the wrong date of his alibi witness, and because of that, they thought he was lying and found him guilty. That, to me, is crazy. That's something I would do. Try to voluntarily say something, and I always forget everything, and say something I didn't mean, or something that was true. I just forgot, it was 6 p.m. instead of 7, and there goes 10 years of my life in prison. As well as, like, a woman in California was babysitting her grandson. Her grandson ended up passing away. The social worker, she agreed to have an interview with the social worker and related to the grandchild. And come to find out, they changed the death of the child from sudden infant death syndrome to shaken baby syndrome. The heartbroken grandmother started questioning herself and started breaking down, crying, like, oh my God, did I really do that? Was it my fault? All of that, if she would have not said none of that, they wouldn't have tried to convict her for the death of her grandchild, because she told the social worker. And the social worker, told that to the police. And the daughter actually went to court and said this was not possible. Like, the grandmother would never do something like that. And it was just a ridiculous, accusation, just because she was being questioned if she did something like that to her grandchild, when that was not the case at all. She never even had a criminal record. She loved her grandchild, the daughter. They were very close. Like, it was just something that, due to the words that she said, could have potentially harmed the rest of her life without her even knowing. That was on page 54 of the book. And then on page 60 of the book, it just talks about how there's hundreds of innocent people in the United States that were wrongfully convicted and later exonerated by DNA evidence. 76% were mistakenly identified by an eyewitness. Sometimes many people assume, that someone was there or that it's this person, and just by pure assumptions, people could potentially have another person be a primary suspect just because they were there when a crime was being committed. Or if someone, if anybody says anything at all, like in the book, it talks about someone saying a crime was being committed somewhere and they just so happened to be there, but they had nothing to do with the crime. But just by them saying they were there and the police doesn't have any other primary suspects, that made them the primary suspect.